Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar series 2.0 by ISOLA Maharashtra chapter, exploring regional landscapes. Now, there are many participants or audiences who have joined in are architects and landscape architects and know about ISOLA and ISOLA Maharashtra chapter. But there are also few people from the there are also a lot of people from the other fields for whom we would like to give a small introduction about our organization. So, ISOLA is the Indian Society of Landscape Architects. It's a professional body of landscape architects which is established in May 2003. And it has about more than 360 members from different states of the country, some from across the world as well. It is at the forefront of creating a global awareness about the fast emerging profession of landscape architecture and promoting and enhancing the professional excellence among the members in India. It is a member of International Federation of Landscape Architects, which itself represents 77 such national associations. The idea of chapters is that ISOLA majorly functions on basis of its chapters, which help it capture the diverse practices that go on and bring it under one platform for interaction and for idea exchange. Such budding chapter is our chapter, Maharashtra chapter. We had the idea of Pune as the epicenter, but then we wanted to make it more inclusive, and that is how the idea came up. So it has about we have conducted about 7 or 8 events up till now, and we have a participation of more than 100 members for each of these events. So every year we conduct these events actually where we invite speakers from different fields, and we take up this lecture series. But considering the pandemic situation now, we have started the webinar series. Basically, the webinar series was also the first webinar series. There are a lot of audiences here who have been with us from the first webinar series. The first webinar series was Ayush Shower Bolu Kahi, which was a series to motivate us and inspire us from the elders in our society. So we had 3 speakers from different fields who were above 70-75 age. There was an architect as well, and with their words of wisdom we have now decided to travel through the region of Maharashtra, since it is a beautiful weather outside and none of us can go. So we have decided to take you all on a virtual trip to along the river Godavari. And our first region that we have started with is Nashik. Last week we were taken into the beautiful hills of Anjani and into the mythological stories which have developed around the Nashik region. Today we will be going a little bit more deeper into this and exploring the region around Nashik and Nashik city as well. So today, for today's session, the moderator is Nandan Malani. So Nandan Malani is basically a practicing architect who's from Nashik, who specializes in landscape design. He has worked with master landscape architect Mohammad Shahir on conceptualizing master plans and landscape schemes for big scale projects like Sundar Nursery and Mirza Ghalib Tomb. He is currently a partner at ISM Architects in Nashik since June 2010, and is also a partner at Cause, which is an initiative which is set up by like-minded architects based in Nashik for welfare of the Nashik city. And they take up projects like which are basically uh, for public benefits or restoration of Nashik city old monuments or areas and region around it, like the trekking center at Trimbakeshwar. So, Nandan, I welcome you to the session, and over to you. Thank you so much.
I'm really grateful to ISOLA Maharashtra chapter for giving me this opportunity. Now let me start with introducing our first guest of honor for the day, landscape architect and environmental planner, architect Amruta Pawar. Amruta ma'am has completed her BArch in 1999 from Nasik district Maratha Vidyaprasarak Samaj College of Architecture. She pursued her MArch in 2001 in landscape architecture from the esteemed SEPT University, Ahmedabad. After a short stint in practice, her interest and environmental concerns and landscape grew. And then she went on to pursue masters in environmental management at University of Western Sydney in 2005. She continued to work in Australia with Cloyston Architects for 4 years. Amruta ma'am and her team won an award of International Ideas competition for Canberra International Arboretum and Garden Design. Amruta ma'am has landscape consultancy practice under the name Sahara Consultancy. She has handled projects of various scale and genre from institutional campus to religious precincts and industrial landscape. She has many social projects to her credit, where her initiatives and persistence have proved a guiding force in working with local authorities. Amruta ma'am has been passionately working in the field of landscape and architecture from past 2 decades. Her practice spans a large geographical region from rural landscape to 21st century smart city models. In every project, she diligently worked on her landscape ideas that could create a positive impact on the ecological setting, starting from site in consideration to its immediate context and larger ecological region. This sensitivity is seen in every minor detail she envisages for her projects and plantation schemes and material palette as well. Always dedicated to her goal and dedicated towards the work. She is full of enthusiasm and collaborates with talented young teams for innovative ideas for greater good of this society. Her experience in planning of plantation work for urban forestry and ecotourism master plan is that shows her local and regional sensibilities. Her project management skills for infrastructure work in landscaping and afforestation have proved beneficial to successful completion of the project. The social connect she establishes with local community with every project exemplifies her aspirations to giving back to society and nature where we all belong. She believes in works that impact society, ecology, and region. Now allow me to introduce another eminent speaker, landscape architect and environmental researcher, Dr. Prajakta Baste. Dr. Prajakta Baste has graduated BArch from Sir J.J. College of Architecture in 1994. She has done her MArch in Environmental Landscape from Premier University, Center for Environmental Planning and Technology, University, Ahmedabad. Practicing as a landscape architect since 1996, she has worked for various landscape projects in and around Nasik. To name a few are the Garden for PTC, BSNL at Nasik, Cultural Hotel, Hotel Sanskruti, Shraddha Park at Shirdi, Bhavabandhan Mangal Karyalaya, etc. She pursued her doctoral studies in the same university in the subject of water, a natural resource and its relation with human settlements. Other areas of her interest are groundwater, water and culture. Her PhD thesis, which have proven a guiding force to win a decade-long battle fought by a local NGO with authorities to remove concretization of riverbed on the historic Ramkund stretch, a matter of grave concern for many sensitive citizens and professionals in the city. The project has finally seen in the light of the day, and the work has started based on her research findings by Dr. Baste. After completion of PhD in 2014, she is contributing in the work for pollution abatement of River Godavari in Nasik. She is appointed as an expert by the Mumbai High Court on the committee appointed for reducing the pollution of River Godavari and developing it ecologically and environmentally. She seeks inspirations and guidance from Magsaysay awardee, the Waterman of India, Rajendranath Singh. She has presented and published several research papers on various issues of water. One of her acclaimed papers are Water Management in Rural Areas of Maharashtra, presented in Seoul, South Korea. A research on need for rules and regulations for monitoring groundwater in urban areas was appreciated in International Conference on Groundwater in 2017 at Delhi. Not only limited to Nasik, but her knowledge about water system is widely appreciated on field, and she is invited by many towns and villages to improve water management systems. Perfect application of academic research, I must say. Her work in this field has been acknowledged by various organizations, and she has been awarded the Swayam Siddha by Shiv Sena, Hirkani Puraskar by Khandesh Maratha Mandal, and Deshdut Karmayogi Puraskar. Articles on issues related to architecture and city planning have featured in newspaper of Maharashtra Times in 2016. Recently, last year, 11 articles on groundwater and its features were published in Vigyan Varta of Maharashtra Times. She is serving as a principal of architecture, College of Nasik District Maratha Vidya Prasarak Samaj for more than a decade now, and her institute is approached by many local authorities to develop proposals for various live projects. This approach is helping the institute to carve a niche for itself. Her work continues as a passion in the field of water. So I welcome architect Amruta Pawar and Dr. Prajakta Baste, and without taking much time, I request them to start your talk. Thank you.
Firstly, before I start, I would like to pay tribute to my late teachers, Professor Prabhakar Bhagwat, Mohammad Shahir. I would also like to thank ISOLA Maharashtra chapter for organizing such interactive talks. This session is to explore the religious regional landscape. I would like to thank my friend Ritu Sharma and the team of ISOLA chapter who have organized this webinar and choosing me to present in front of you all, reading geography through stories, River Godavari. As everybody knows, the pandemic is going very severe in Maharashtra, and we all are facing, or our relatives are facing, some kind of problem or the other. In that situation, you all have turned in big number, and therefore I welcome you all, the landscape architects, students, everybody I welcome for this presentation. Why regional landscape? What is the need of it? Well, if it was an interactive talk and I was in front of you all, definitely there would be answers coming from the audiences. But here, let me answer. And before answering, I would like to draw your attention towards the COVID pandemic. What exactly is this virus? This virus is a count of 1 lakh which sits on the tip of a needle. 1,000 count going into our human body gets infected, and it disturbs the entire human ecosystem. The entire body is disturbed, and due to that, the entire world is today disturbed. Regional landscape is, imagine this is a foot. A foot is the area of regional landscape. Now tell me, what is that you can see? It is the black spot or the foot? I think it is the black spot that everybody can see first, and then the foot. So this is what is noticeable, the black spot, which is very disturbing. It's not very appealing or adding value in that area of the foot. Just to understand more in detail, if this is what the region is, what exactly goes into the regional landscape? Regional landscape is made of geology, soil, rocks, earth, and this geology is all the way deep, goes core into the earth's crust. So entire thing, mantle itself is called geology, from the surface to the core of the earth. This is geology of Nasik district. It is of basalt rock, and this photograph is where the river Godavari origins. Can you see lots of waterfalls are going on? This is the mountain from where it origins, and this kind of falls come down and the river is then formed. The second aspect to the regional landscape is hydrology. Hydrology, which covers catchments, aquifers, rainfall, oceans, water flows, streams, everything. It is basically the movement of water. The water, everybody knows what this water cycle is. the water that evaporates from the oceans, the streams, the river. It evaporates from the vegetation, the agricultural land, soil, and then forms clouds and it rains. Part of the rain goes into the groundwater and part is being flows into the catchment and goes to the ocean. Now, what is exactly groundwater? Groundwater is where there is a constant movement in the earth below the ground of water at various levels. This groundwater has approximately many layers of aquifers, but the superficial aquifer is somewhere from 50 meters, 50 feet, 150 feet to 250 feet or more, it goes deeper. The upper florid aquifer is somewhere from 500 feet to 1000 feet, and the lower aquifer, which is from 1000 feet to 2000, 5000, and the deepest that goes is 9000 or 9000 meters, that is 3000 plus 30,000 plus feet. Now, these aquifers, which is the lowest one, is generally contaminated with salt water, whereas the topmost aquifers are the aquifers which flow towards the sea but have water which is sweet water. So, what exactly is the river basin and how is it being created? If you can see on the slide, there is a watershed dotted line that shows that it is a catchment area of that particular river. There is a source or the start point of the river. From there, you have streams, substreams, tributaries connecting to each other, forming a channel, which is the main river course, and then that flowing goes all the way towards the ocean. So that big is the river basin. Can you imagine if it is Trambakeshwar and we are going to go all the way to Hyderabad, to Vizag, where the river Godavari meets the ocean? This long stretch is what is the catchment or the watershed of Godavari River. Today we are going to talk just about Nasik district. Nasik is a very small it is from Trambakeshwar to Nasik district boundary. It is just 90 kilometers. And the river stretch is less than that. It is just 50 to 60 kilometers. So we are going to talk about that particular region where how the river Godavari behaves in Nasik district. Just to get a clearer idea, can you see this slide? This is what the river basins are, and there are lots of small streams, river connecting. Just to get a clear idea, this slide is. Okay, now river in regional landscape and what sort of role it is or how the rivers are being divided. That the rivers are divided into three parts. One is the youthful or the young stage river. The second is the middle or mature course river. And the third is the old age river. So the youth is very linear, straight, that you can see, whereas matured has a meandering path. And if you see the lower section, the cross section, it has a wider plain. The flood plain is very wide, whereas old age river, it keeps meandering, and the meandering is so high that at places it creates lakes called oxbow lakes, and the river keeps flowing. So if you see the youth or the young age river, this is where Nasik Godavari river lies in. It is in the youth stage, and this youth stage river, this is a clearer diagram where you can see the floodplains going larger and larger till the old age. Mature streams, the floodplains are bigger, but the flow is smaller. And young stage, it's very small. Nasik district has river banks from 50 to 60 meters, not more than that. That's how small the river banks are. So it's a small stream which collects and goes bigger as it reaches the ocean. This is again a clearer picture of how you can see how the river gets matured and how it is in the young stage. And by the time it reaches the old age, what happens. So just taking you through the regional landscape in general, how it is composed of. Regional landscape is first is geological aspect, second is the hydrological aspect, third is the soil, and fourth is ecology plus vegetation. These all four components create regional landscape. This is the river Godavari basin limited to Nasik district. There are very fine lines that you can see, and that is to the scale where you can see lots of streams and tributaries joining and forming one kind of this is where the actual river then starts flowing, but there are n number of streams, tributaries, substreams that start, and the origin is somewhere here. So from there you keep going all the way down. To start with Nasik district regional landscape, I will be talking with the ecology, culture, and agriculture part and how it's been developed. Nasik, the river Godavari, where it starts, the ecology is of dry, deciduous teakwood forest, and you still have that forest in few bits and pieces around Nasik. The culture of Nasik, everybody knows, is the Kumbh Mela. One has been held in Trambakeshwar and other has been held in Ramkund, Nasik. So that kind of religious and cultural association of entire India is with the river Godavari. Whereas agriculture, if you see, we are very strong in onions, grapes, and sugarcane. These are the major crops that forms the landscape of this Nasik district. This is a plan where it is a Google plan, and I would like to draw your attention that there are two water bodies. One water body is a larger dam which collects water for Nasik city, and there is one more which is at the lower end. This map also tells you that there are two religious spots. This is Trambakeshwar and this is Nasik city, where the Kumbh Melas are being hosted. This is the green circle that has come up is a bird sanctuary, which is called Nandur Madheshwar. And there you get all these migrant birds. Now they have started coming in, and it is declared as National Birds Sanctuary. Right on the river Godavari, which is 50 kilometers from the origin, 50 to 60 kilometers. There are satellite towns, and unfortunately there are these 3 satellite towns, one major city, 2-tier city, and one town, a small city, Trambakeshwar. These 5 cities contaminate the entire Nasik Godavari river. Where Trambakeshwar is, there are forests, but there is a paddy field. Paddy is being grown at some extent in that area. And where the river is, along that, the entire sugarcane belt is there. The rest is covered with grapes and onions. Now, why did I show you the foot earlier? What was the meaning of that foot? Whatever I have shown you previously tells that this is how the landscape, regional landscape is and how it is playing a role for Nasik district. Now, if you see what are the impacts that humans have been creating or the landscape architects need to be aware when they are doing the practice is the global warming, the deforestation, which leads to soil erosion, change of course of river, damaging the topsoil, land reclamation itself. And Nasik is a classic example because we have so many substreams which have been reclaimed and are being constructed by the builders on top of it just because they are no more important. That's what they feel. But that is impacted the flow of water which flows through the river. There is irregularity of rainfall. Ozone layer is getting deteriorated. Urbanization is creating heat islands, and you keep on, and there are so many things. So what exactly is happening with landscape as a profession and the region? This is what is happening, that everybody of us are doing this small, tiny bits and pieces somewhere and creating this red, dangerous kind of landscape, which is not helping. It is not helping the region, it's not helping the environment nor the ecology. When so many problems are there, how do you mitigate this kind of impact? Landscape architects and designers in the country today are playing a pivotal role, and it is a fast changing form because there are lots of industries coming in, lots of infrastructure projects coming in, and therefore the country is changing very fast. So what is the role of landscape architect? Landscape architects create places for people to live, work, and play in a linear approach. This approach was what we were taught, we were practicing. The linear approach is what it means that you go, remove something from the ground, dig, say soil, put it into your land, create a landscape, and this is similar to other professions also. You mine an area, you remove something from the area and you use it for something else. You remove a chemical from the ground and you use it for something else. So that process is called linear landscape. So extracting from the ground and using it for something else to create something else. Now, this linear approach itself has been questioned, and now what is that landscape architects need to do? Landscape architects now need to speak up for places as well as for plants, animals to thrive and create our own landscape resilient approach. Now, what is resilient approach? Why can't India has a India? We do have in all cities. Majorly, we have dogs and we have cows which are sitting in the street, but that doesn't mean that we are practicing or we are creating spaces for them to live and thrive. So there has to be a resilient landscape. And what is resilient landscape? Resilient landscape is able to recoil or spring back to its shape after bending, stretching, or compressing. So let's consider we have to the ecology, we have compressed the ecology, we have coiled the springs so tightly and so small that it wants to spring back again and it has to spring back to its original form. That is what is resilient landscape. Present day landscape profession has to be trained. I mean, we all need to be trained and we need to train ourselves that not just garden beautification is our role, but ecologically sensitivity and protecting the nature, natural resources through various scales. You know, there are complexities. The complexities are quite large. They start from regional landscapes, housing, institutional, recreational, urban, heritage landscape, infrastructure projects, industrial and household spaces. But these complexities and the landscape gelling can be done, can be achieved. And how? So I would just put more light on resilient landscape. What is resilient landscape? A very classic example that has happened in this lockdown. You know, all these animals who were part of our cities started coming in because the human race had stopped. The human race stopped and they thought that this was their space. They started coming into the space. They wanted water, they wanted to sit. This is what was the picture around the year. Everywhere you find different cities having such kind of animals coming on the street. India is having lots of cows, but this is in University of Sussex where all the cows enter the university and they thought that was their space and they wanted to sit there. So such is what is happening with this is how the resilient landscape is, that they want to come back, they want to be part of and be one. So this just tells that planet Earth, we now need to look as a living entity. It is not just, our approach is not limited to just a small piece of land and acres of land, or and infrastructure project, it is more larger responsibility that we need to take, and we need to think that how we can get this all living organisms, plants, animals, and landscape into our own day-to-day activity and give them their own spaces, create, design that sort of spaces. When I've spoken this all, I feel that this seems to be very theoretical. Is this achievable? Can anybody do this? So I have taken my own case study and I would like to present that. This is a case study of Auric. Auric is an Aurangabad industrial residential city located in Aurangabad. The client is government client, and the landscape architect, I am myself with Clouston Associate. Clouston is what was being introduced, that I had worked with Clouston Associate in Sydney. So I am doing a joint venture project with them. Now, this site is 1,600 acres, which is an industrial city with residential pockets in between. This is a Make in India project proposed by central government, and Maharashtra has started this pilot project of Auric, named as Auric. This site initially had all lakes. You can see there is a lake, almost 5 lakes are there, and these all 5 lakes were used as percolation tanks for the agricultural land. Now the entire land has been taken over for industries. Therefore, the purpose of this small lakes is no more as percolation. And we were appointed as landscape architects, and they wanted to create a beautiful, internationally looking landscape. So the thought process that we, after visiting the site, came up is, there are these hills which are there, and nice hills are there on the north side. We thought, why can't we borrow that landscape? And why can't we add value to our own site? So we decided first is to do reforestation to this land. The client was ready, make camping sites in it, have good trails in it, let people walk into it, but have good afforestation done for the entire area. So first was that is the borrowed landscape aspect that we convinced client, and client was ready for it. There were existing water streams into it, which then go further, but there were water streams coming into the site, and we changed the master plan. Already had retained few, but we had to change few areas, and we said the connection between the hills and the lakes or the stream is getting cut off. So can you spare us some kind of area where we can, a plot where we can connect to the hills? And the client listened to it. There is this area here where we got the plot, they agreed to it, and the connection of the biodiversity was maintained. Likewise, there is a plot at this point, unfortunately not in this plan, but yes, from there also the connection comes all the way to the creek down and the streams. So we try to connect everywhere from the hills and make sure that the biodiversity corridor is not hampered. This is through vegetation we tried to achieve. The second thing that we tried to achieve was the water. The lakes were used for percolation, for agriculture. Now the lakes would be used for beautification, for leisure. So just storing water is the purpose if we linearly think, but now thinking in a different way, or the resilient way, I would say that we propose to have the stream water coming into it, but it would filter itself naturally by the RIDS. The recycled water we would pump when it evaporates, when the water is evaporated, it has to be refilled to a particular level. So we would be using the recycled water, and there would be a percolation system happening. So the groundwater we don't want to disturb, but that percolation system would have French trenches and a well where the water gets collected, which is absolutely purified, very clean, naturally purified, taking that water and repumping into the lake. This idea is what is called resilient landscape, that we use our own techniques, our own ways to create good landscape and not have lots of man-made or lots of digging part, or sustainable way approach is what is being done here. I would take you to the next slide. This is what is proposed and the construction right now is going on, where you see lots of trees, very less lawn spaces. These spaces are to put the exhibition of industries. Otherwise, we have created huge Miyake forest, which is a forest type of Japanese way of plantation. We have used that and we are trying to plant the entire lake, have boardwalks, very limited area for people to walk, and have very clean, good quality of water, which today our rivers don't have. Our rivers have been turned as gutters. Our rivers, we can't walk along the riverfront. They stink, they smell, they have all sorts of discharges into it. So this is where we don't want these lakes to be in that form. And we have taken care and measures to make sure that the water in this area naturally, as well as the management part of it, looks into it that this water is stayed clean, nice, and usable. This is one more photograph where we have different lake and different approach. Same approach with lots of plants, lots of trees, and very few areas of lawn. This is again third lake where we are connecting from the hills. This is the creek. We are having lots of plantations here. Also on the hilltop, which is the forest area, we would be having reforestation. From the roads, we get the water here, and we all have all this as plantation. This is the purifying beds, which is called reed beds, which are the plants which naturally purify the quality of water. And this is again the belt which we connect further, which has maintained the biodiversity coming from the hill into this stream, the lake and the stream below. Obviously, on the peripheral, there are dense plantation. If you can see how we have managed to have parking, we have managed to have areas where they can have displays. See, this area is going to house almost 50,000 plus people. They would be living here. This is a kind of smart city, but an industrial smart city. So we will have to have spaces where they have gathering space, they have cultural exhibitions spaces, industrial expo spaces. So such kind of lawn areas have been left for that kind of event. Otherwise, we have made sure that we have huge plantation, that too plantation that comes from the region of Aurangabad, not the region of Nasik. So study those and try to implement here. Few images how it would look. Now to conclude, what present day landscape professionals are. Present day landscape professionals are standing at an interjunction with multiple layers. So the interjunction is not just 4 roads coming in, but there are lots of stakeholders and there are layers to it. Say a contractor coming in, a hydrologist coming in, geologist coming in, their viewpoints, the government, the bureaucrats, the politicians, you name it, and all those stakeholders are there. The industrialist, the environmentalist, the effluent disposer, effluent creation. So these are all anti-ecologic aspects, and you still have to deal and you have to find a balance where you can create an habitat and also you can create landscape which houses ecosystem and development together. So this is what I would like to draw your attention to, that today landscape architects really have to change their perspectives and make sure that we shift from linear landscape approach to resilient landscape approach. Thank you. This is what I had to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Amruta ma'am. Basta ma'am, now you can start your presentations.
Well, I'll be talking about the river Godavari and the elements which are the reason for framing and developing the culture in the river basin of Godavari. As Nandan has appropriately said that I have been studying this region for a long time, and my aspect of study or the focus of my study was the water resources in this basin, and naturally, automatically, it got focused on the other aspects of the nature and the environment, that is the geology and the geomorphology of this region. As I understand that the elements of nature, they stand in integration, and they work in conjunction. In the prehistoric and historic ages, man has worked, has evolved, developed himself in the conjunction with these natural elements. He has always tried to understand the characteristics of elements and the processes of nature and used them for his benefit. Today, I am going to discuss the relationship between the elements of geology, geomorphology, the river, and the human settlements in the upper Godavari basin. The study is based over a span of 2000 years. To begin with, I will introduce a few definitions with which if we know at the beginning of the presentation, we will be able to understand the landscape of Godavari or the Godavari basin in much detail, and we will be able to appreciate it. So I'm just defining 4 terms which if we go through will help us throughout the presentation. As we all know that Godavari runs through or flows through the Deccan Trap formations. The Deccan Trap formations are volcanic formations which have taken place 67 million years ago, that is during the Cretaceous Paleogene boundary, that is the geologic age of our Earth, 67 million years ago. This event marked the extinction of dinosaurs and laid the geological foundation for the new biozones to come on the surface of the Earth. The Deccan province today covers 500,000 kilometers square and houses 2 major river systems in the southern India. Over a period of thousands of years, the geophysical characters of this Deccan basalt have emerged, and for us to understand the Godavari basin and its culture, which has derived or which developed because of these features, we need to know these 4 definitions. First is the dissected plateau, the escarpment, a mesa, and a butte. So a dissected plateau is a plateau which has undergone a lot of weathering or denudation and breaks up into small pieces. As you can see in the photograph on the right-hand side top, these are the features of a dissected plateau. An escarpment. An escarpment is a steep slope or a long cliff that forms as a result of faulting or erosion, and it separates 2 relatively leveled areas, okay, by different elevations. In common language, this escarpment is also called as a scarp. The third important feature of this geologic formations, and which have resulted into the morphology of the Godavari basin, is the mesas. The mesas are flat-topped elevations or ridges on hills, which are bounded on all sides by steep slopes. They are standalone entities in the landscape, but which have a broader top at the broader area at the top. A butte. A butte is an isolated hill, again with steep slopes on all the sides, which are quite vertical, and a very relatively small area at the top. Sometimes the denudation and the erosion takes place over here, if the soft surfaces are there over here, and it gets converted into spire, which is also often seen in the landscape of Sahyadri. So the geomorphological features of Godavari Basin over here in the Sahyadri Mountains is a dissected plateau, an escarpment, the mesas, and the butte. We will see the role of these geomorphological features, how they have shaped the development of human settlements and the culture in turn in this basin. To begin with, we will be focusing upon this area of the Upper Godavari Basin. As Amruta ma'am has told, that Godavari Basin originates in the hills of Trimbakeshwar range over here, that is a part of the Sahyadri range, and then it flows towards the Rajamundri and goes into the Bay of Bengal. The Deccan Plateau gives rise to another river system, that is the Krishna River system over here. We all know that we are surrounded by the Sahyadri Mountains over here on the running north-south, in the north-south direction. The Satmala ranges or the Ajanta range or the Chandwad range you can see over here, that runs in the east-west direction, and the Kalsubai range over here. So this Upper Godavari region is surrounded by these three hill ranges: the Sahyadri range, the Satmala range, which further continues to become the Ajanta and the Ajanta range over here, and the Kalsubai range. The Kalsubai is the highest peak over here in this range. And the city of Nasik is located over here, right at the center of this entire hill range. I will not be speaking about the prehistoric settlements over here in the Godavari Basin, although there are records which are found and they are there available for our references, but they are very meager. The first human settlements, historic settlements, which have got recorded and which can be acknowledged are during the Satvahana period. The Satvahana dynasty is the earliest dynasty that has arose within the Deccan Plateau. It is often called as the second wave of urbanization. Now, what happened during the Satvahana period is that the city or the region of Nasik became very prosperous. It became prosperous because of many reasons. First, because the Satvahanas, they promoted the agricultural practices and the cultivation practices in the fertile lands of Godavari. They had an administrative setup and a revenue collection system. The architects in this group, they will be knowing that we find the initial mentions of forming a settlement in different types. For example, the Nagara, Nigama, and Gama, these are the terminologies those we get from the Satvahana period. This period was also responsible for the development of Buddhist caves and Buddhist architecture to a very large extent in the Deccan Plateau. So, the first acknowledgeable human settlements or the intervention of man in the Godavari Basin is observed during the Satvahana period. As I said, that there were many reasons why the city of Nasik or the region of Nasik or this Upper Godavari Basin came into light or became a focused area in the Satvahana period was the reason of trade routes. During the age of Satvahanas, the Nasik district was very prosperous, as I said. It fell on the route or the trade route which started from Tagara or Pratishthan. Tagara is there in Usmanabad today and Pratishthan is Paithan. So we had a trade route which started from Tagara or Ter or Paithan, which went through Nasik and went to the Sopara. Sopara, which is near Kalyan. So the trading of the architectural products, the merchandise, happened between these 2 points through the city of Nasik. And these inland routes had a long distance connection with the Roman trades, as you must have read in our studies of architecture and the studies of historical landscape. So this is the first time that we realize that the upper Godavari basin, or a region in the upper Godavari basin, is getting noticed, it is getting promoted, and it is getting developed. Similarly, Nasik also got connected to Pithalkora and Ajanta, the Burhanpur and the Ujjain route, and this was called as the Uttarapatha, the route that went towards the northern area of the Indian subcontinent, and a Dakshin Path a route that came towards the south. So that is how the importance of Nasik came into picture, and it started developing and progressing. If I speak about the culture or the regional landscape, today I can say that it can cover an area from the city of Nasik to the city of Paithan or Aurangabad. The river is the common thread. Also, the mountain ranges also become the thread to combine or bind this area as one part of the entire Godavari culture that we have in India. This region, which includes the Nashik and Paithan, can be called as the A sub-region or one sub-region with respect to the culture, the geography, the geomorphology, and the water conditions over here. Within this region, now I will be speaking about the first sub-region, that is the Nasik region. The Paithan Aurangabad comes along with the understanding of the development of the Buddhist architecture at the Ajanta Ellora. It comes along with the development of settlements in the Ahmednagar area, the development of settlements in the Aurangabad area. So we will try to look at the development of culture, the relation of human settlements with these three aspects, that is the geology, geomorphology, and water in the region of Nasik. As I told you that on the western side, we have the Sahyadri range, which becomes a closure kind of a mountain range for the city to be located over here. The Trimbak Hill range is over here, through which the Godavari comes into the plains. The Satmala mountains are over here. The Chandwad range is somewhere over here, and passing this or going through this region, we go into the other watershed or the other river basin, that is the Girna and the Mosam basins over here, and the Malegaon district. The Satvahanas, as I told you, were the patrons to develop the Buddhist caves on the trade routes. This is Nasik over here. This is the Sopara over here, or the Kalyan over here, and the trade route ran through Nasik like this. So while the trade route was running through Nasik, the Satvahanas patronized the development of the Pandulena caves over here on a hill. Now the Pandulena cave is an escarpment. It is a steep rise from a landscape, and in that steep rise of that landscape of a mountain, these caves are carved out as Buddhist caves. The crossing of this entire pass over here, or the trade route, goes through the Kasara Ghat, which we now know today as the Kasara Ghat. Previously, it was known as the Thalghat Pass. So these mountain ranges have supported and helped in the development of the commercial trade route of this region, the religiousness of the religious development of this region. As you can see over here, many buttes and were topped with stone temples and flanked by hundreds of caves, temples that gave the forts a joint religious military use and signification. This is something we will look into the next slide. So this Godavari basin becomes the first watershed which starts from a rise of around 1100 meters and goes up to 1400 meters from the mean sea level. The city of Nasik is basically located at a level of around 600 meters, between 500 meters to 600 meters in the plains, and finally goes into a plain at the Nandur Madmeshwar context over here. So as I said, after the Satavahanas, the period in the Nasik region was not very focused. It did not develop as a capital region. The rulers during the Satavahana kingdom made Nasik as their capital to rule from here. After Nasik, they shifted their capital to Paithan. Okay, so what happened in the surrounding areas? After the Satavahanas, we see a big drop in between, and till the period of Yadavas. The Yadavas were the ones who started building forts, temples, or some kinds of fortresses on these mountains, or they started taking advantage of these geomorphological features of the Sahyadri range and the Satmala range. Now these are some pictures from these various mountain ranges. The first is the Ahivanta fort. It is just near Nasik in the Taluka of Dindori. Ramshes, which is hardly 12 to 15 kilometers from the city of Nasik. The Harihar fort in the Igatpuri range. The Chandwad fort in the Chandwad range. The Mangitungi fort in the Salher-Mulher range, which is across the Godavari basin, and the Arankulang fort in the Saputara, in the Kalsubai range. Now here you can see that these are the similar features which we can observe. This is a complete spire that has evolved over a period of thousands of years of denudation or erosion that has taken place in this area. And this is the form of dissected plateau at the bottom of which we will find the villages are placed in the rural areas. So these kind of formations have often given rise to water bodies, to the watersheds, to the streams, to the rivulets, and the settlements to get developed. These kind of features have also performed as protective features for all the administrative domain that the Yadavas, the Marathas, and the Mughals they developed after in their period. So these geomorphological features, they acted as the posts or the governing points for the rulers and to define their administrative boundaries, to protect the people from the invasions. Okay, so this is one period that comes into picture within the Godavari region after the Satavahanas that we need to notice. But since it did not have a very important feature or an important role to be played, this is often not understood and talked about as an aspect of human settlement or as an aspect of relation between the humans and the geomorphological features. Coming to the aspect of river now, the river Godavari. As I told you that the two river systems which are there, the Krishna river system and the Godavari river system, they are flowing through the Deccan Trap. And the Deccan Trap is an igneous rock formation. That is a compact basalt formation. And within the geology or within the rock formations, there are various features such as faults, fractures, lineaments, and dikes. The Godavari is a fracture, or it can be called as a lineament, and through which the water course is formed today. Apart from this natural definition of the river Godavari, we will look into the religious significance or the mythological significance of river Godavari. The first significant relation of Godavari is the Simhastha Kumbha Mela. The Kumbha Mela is a day or an event when the Jupiter enters into the Leo sun sign. And when this day happens, that is the day which is called for the rejoicing of Kumbh Mela. All of you must be knowing that it happens in 4 places in India: Haridwar, Prayag, Ujjain, and Nashik. And it gets related to the story of one drop of the Amrit which was dropped at these 4 locations, and that is why the Kumbh Mela is being held at these 4 locations in India. A small story goes that a Kumbh Mela is an assimilation or a congregation of all the sadhus which come throughout India at these 4 places after 12 years. The Peshwas were the ones who supported this activity very, very profoundly and encouraged and systemized this activity. What happened sometime in 1789, there was a big fight between the sadhus or the sannyasis, because it is revered that who will have the first dip in the river Godavari was the point of debate. And there was a big stampede in which around 12,000 sadhus died. And that is why the Peshwas decided that hence onwards, this Kumbh Mela will now take place at 2 places, that is at Nasik and the other at Trimbakeshwar. So apart from this small story, coming back to the religious significance of river Godavari, the first significance is of conduction of the Kumbh Mela. The second significance is of Panchavati, where it is said that Lord Rama has stayed over here at this location for few years of his exile, and it was the area of Panchavati where 5 banyan trees are found, and he stayed in this Dandakaranya. This was a part of Dandakaranya, and there's a small story of how the Dandakaranya, or the name is there for this forests in this Deccan plateau, as Dandaka. And the third significance is because of Lord Rama, that is the existence of Ramkunda. The Ramkunda is actually a sangam of 2 rivers, the Aruna river and the Godavari river. The properties of water over here are said to be such that if we put the bones in this pond, they will dissolve automatically in a certain period of time. So this was observed, and this property of water was articulated in a form of a pond by Chitrarao Khatav. He was a landholder from the Satara district in 1696. So after the Satvahanas, Nasik starts to become starts to become an identity because of the religious significance and the articulation of this religious significance in the riverbed of Godavari. In the Puranas, there is a reference of river Godavari with respect to several stories of the gods, the Asuras, the Rakshasas, and the Apsaras. So, if we consider the origin of Godavari at Gangapur Gauthan, that is around 21 kilometers upstream of where we are situated as the real Gauthan of Nasik. From the Gauthan of Nasik, around 18 to 21 kilometers upstream is the Gauthan of Gangapur over here. There are these tirthas which are there acknowledged on the banks of Godavari in the Puranas. Now these tirthas are actually some kinds of water forms which are existing at these points. And when I say water forms, I mean to say that water in the form of groundwater or water in the form of surface water. The surface water in the form of streams. These streams will often have small names like the Aruna, Varuna, Saraswati, Nagzira, Waghadi, Kapila. These are these streams which come and join the river Godavari from the Gangapur or the Govardhan Gauthan till the city of Nasik. And while these streams are joining, there is an additional flow, that is the underground flow, which is also observed at some points on the stretch of the Godavari. The definition of Tirtha is often found as a place of Sangam. Sangam is a confluence of two water bodies, a tributary with a main river. So the Sangamas are often treated as the most important ones to have a bath. Okay, and there are then stories which get related to these Sangamas. For example, I will read out that from Govardhan to Nasik, there are 10 tirthas which are associated over here. In short, I'll tell you some interesting stories in a single line or two. For example, in Govardhan, the Govardhan Tirtha, Pitri Tirtha, Galav Tirtha, Brahma Tirtha, and Runamuchan Tirtha or Kshudha Tirtha. These are the 5 tirthas which are over here in the Govardhan region, and there's a small stream which comes and joins over here at the Govardhan region. So it is said that a donation of one single cow, if it is done at this location, is equivalent to a donation of 1,000 cows and gives us the piousness of doing this kind of a ritual. The second is the Kshudha Tirtha or the Kanva Tirtha, which is just downstream of the Govardhan Tirtha over here. It is said there was once a sage called Kanva, and he was feeling very hungry on one day. And in front of him in that region, he had a Jain sadhu which was there. A Jain saint who had lot of ample of food over there. But Kanva Muni, he did not want to ask food from him, and he did not want to satisfy his hunger taking food from the Jain saint. So he kept on fasting for a day, for a two, and tried to please goddess Annapurna. Looking at the fast of this Muni, the goddesses Annapurna got pleased, and she took a human form and came in front of Kanva Rishi or Kanva Muni, and she said, "What is your demand?" He said, "I am feeling hungry. Kindly suffice my hunger." And then onwards, it is found that whoever goes and prays at this spot over here and does meditation with whole heart openness will not go hungry. So this is some small stories which are there mentioned in the mythology of the river Godavari over here. Then we come down towards the falls downstream of the Someshwar falls, that is the Agni Tirtha and the Koti Tirtha. The Agni Tirtha again also is on a confluence of a stream. Today that we know in Nashik is the Malhar Khan over here. And the Malhar Khan has a big stream which carries water from a watershed of around 5 to 6 kilometers upstream on this side. And the Agni Tirtha over here has a mythological story that Lord Agni, the fire god, was once suffering from some ailments, and he came over here over this spot, had a dip over here at this location in the river Godavari, and all his diseases were cured, and he became hale and hearty by having a dip at this location of in the river, and that is why it is called as the Agni Tirtha. And then we come down to actually the stretch of Godavari, where it turns towards the southern direction. Godavari is also called as the Dakshin Ganga over here, and Ramkunda is one place where we can identify the sudden change in the angle of the river flow, and from where it becomes the Dakshin Vahini, and that is why we call river Godavari as the Dakshin Ganga also. So that additionally becomes a significant reason for us to have the Ramkunda as one of the religiously significant areas, that the Godavari turns over here towards the southern direction. So upstream of this Ramkunda, there's one Badrika Sangam Tirtha and the Brahma Tirtha over here. So the Badrika Sangam Tirtha also has a very interesting story. the Kapila Sangam, the Badrika Sangam Tirtha over here. Yeah. So it is said that the rulers of Devgiri used to come specially for a holy dip and a bath over here in the Badrika Sangam Tirtha. The Lord Brahma is supposed to have a bath, who has had a bath at this point, because he was supposed to ensure that when he was creating this entire universe, there should be no fault or there should be no mistake in his creation. And that is why, to ensure that piousness, he had a dip over here at this point at the Badrika Sangam Tirtha and the Brahma Tirtha over here. That is also called as the Brahma Tirtha. And so with him, he had Lord Vishnu and Lord Shiva. And these stories get associated with the construction of temples which are there on the either banks of river Godavari at this point. And that is the Kapaleshwar temple, which is the Vishnu temple over Shiva temple, and the Sundar Narayan temple, which is the Vishnu temple on the left hand side bank. So this is how these stories come into picture, and the temples, the construction of temples have got associated on the banks of river Godavari. Similarly, after as we go downstream, we have the Tapovan area over here and the Takri region over here, where we have again 3 tirthas, that is the Kapila Sangam Tirtha, Ahilya Sangam Tirtha, and the Papa Vinashana Tirtha. As you can see from these 2 words, these are again the points where 2 streams are meeting river Godavari, that is the Ahilya Sangam Tirtha and the Kapila Sangam Tirtha. Yeah, so this is the distribution of the tirthas on the entire stretch of river Godavari. The 6 tirthas over here in the region of Govardhan and Gangapur, the 3 tirthas over here at the falls of Someshwar, 2 tirthas near the within the city near the Malhar Khand, that is the Koti Tirtha and the Agni Tirtha, and 10 tirthas in the sacred stretch or the religious stretch of river Godavari, where the old Gauthan then started developing, and 3 more tirthas, as I said, in the region of Tapovan, that is the Kapila Sangam Tirtha. So these are a few images which can tell you that along how the aspects of the natural feature and the mythology comes together to promote and develop the human settlements. This is the hill range of Trimbakeshwar. As you can see on the background, it almost forms an amphitheater for the small town of Trimbakeshwar, which has got developed at the foothills of this mountain range. These are the escarpments on which you can see the waterfalls during the rainy season, and that is why this area is called as the headwaters of river Godavari basin. This is the Trimbakeshwar temple placed on the foreground and the background of this escarpment, and such a beautiful scenic view that we have in the month of Shravana, which again sometimes makes me feel that why people really go for these religious tourism, which happens in the city of Nasik over here. This is the stretch of Someshwar waterfalls over here, and here you can see there are some historical constructs and a small temple over here, which signifies the historical development in the stretch of the Someshwar. And here actually we see a great drop in the riverbed of this Godavari basin. It is a drop of around 20 meters where the river falls from one level to the lower level over here. Here's one more interesting feature that I will discuss in the latter part of my presentation, which is a geological feature. Since I am discussing only the morphological features over here, I would just like to show you the morphological aspects of the Godavari basin on the upper end. And this is how the river flows into the plains after the Tapovan, and here you can see the flatland or the plains of Godavari are there. So the holy stretch, as I said, has started developing over here on this stretch. That is where the river turns into takes a direction towards the south. And as you can see, and as I told you, that there are these four major river streams which join over here at this location: the Aruna, the Varuna, the Nagzira, and the Saraswati. So these four streams were, I suppose, they were instrumental for the human settlements to majorly start developing at this location on the river Godavari. These are some photographs which will give you a glimpse of the historical developments which were done by the Peshways and the Ahilyabai Ahilyabai Holkar. These are the tirthas which are there, along which the kundas or the kunds were developed. And now these kunds or these ghats itself have become the identity of Godavari, or the architectural development which has happened on the riverfront as such within the city of Nasik. This is one big bridge that connects the Nasik city on both the sides. That is called as the Victoria Bridge, which was built by the Britishers. There's a story like when this bridge was being constructed, the citizens of the old Gauthan were saying that we will not cross this bridge, because they had religious attachments towards the water flow in the river, such that they will be walking over the water and it will be a disrespect towards the water of river Godavari, and that is why they refused to cross this bridge for a very long time. But as time passed by and they understood the functional utility of this connectivity, they started using this bridge. So one small reference of how we get associated with these natural features, how our emotions and get reflected in our day-to-day activity, and they connect with the river that we have. As I told you, this is the Badrika Sangam Tirtha which goes over here at the Sundar Narayan temple, and the Brahma Tirtha over here. We have the Kapaleshwar temple over here right in front of the Sundar Narayan temple, which is placed over here. Lord Brahma is supposed to have a dip, had a dip over here, with then the Vishnu coming over here and the Shiva temple coming over here. The second important kunda over here is the Aruna, Surya, Chakra and Ashwini Tirtha over here, where we have a confluence actually of three streams and two underground water streams over here. And that is why this location of Godavari in the river Godavari is also considered to be very, very important. Yes, the Sundar Narayan temple, a small story that I would like to share, that it is Lord Vishnu's temple, and the reason for the name Sundar is that he once became ugly by the curse given by a wicked demon's wife, Vrunda. Due to the curse, Lord Vishnu turned back black and ugly, and then he took a bath in the river Godavari and thus was relieved from the curse. Hence, Lord Vishnu is called as the Sundar Narayan over here. This temple, as I said, is constructed on the Badrika Sangam Tirtha. This Tirtha finds a mention in the Gnaneshwari also, and it is said that the kings of Devgiri often came here for a religious dip and performed their rites in this pond. In 1756, the Sundar Narayan temple was built by Gangadhar Yashwantrao Chandrachud, and it is placed, and the angle of the temple is such that on 21st March, the rays of the rising sun first fall exactly upon the idols within this temple. So this is how the architecture or the settlement or the structures get related to the stories, the mythologies, the astronomy and the waterfront as such. To conclude, I would really say that this region has seen three different distinctive phases of development. The development of man in this region can be classified at a regional scale or as a macro scale, where human adjustment was to the characters of the plateau, the dissections of the plateau, through which the river basin drainage and its plains, the development of mountain passes, commercial routes, and cultivation practices. The second phase was a meso scale, where the development of the Mesa and Buttes, two fortresses, protected the plateau cities. It helped in the watershed development of this region. It helped in the development of dugwell irrigation, rainwater harvesting, and storing of rainwater, because river Godavari and Krishna, they are not perennial. They are not perennial rivers. They are rain-fed rivers, and that is why water scarcity is something that is often witnessed by these regions. That is why the geomorphology and the geology becomes very important in these regions for the humans to survive and for the humans to understand these aspects of nature. We understand that the Deccan Trap is a trap where the water is readily not available. But as you can see, most of the settlements in this plateau region have flourished only because of the availability of water from the ground. And this groundwater is still available over here in the actually in the river bed and also in the surrounding areas. So from a macro scale, we come to a meso scale where the mountains were used as watersheds. The mountains were used to protect the developments within this basin and the sub basins. And then we come to a smaller scale, that is the micro scale, where actually we sited our cities. The siting and construction of smaller towns took place, and Nasik as a reference over here. On the river banks, sacred springs, rock-cut architecture, the cisterns, construction of temples and ghats are some features of this area which have happened in the past 1,000 years. So on the right-hand side, you can see that the elements of nature and the manifestation or the articulation of man that has been done in these thousands of years to make this region as a completely dynamic geocultural region till today. With this, I end my lecture on this small aspect of understanding the river basin or the Godavari basin, not only with the focus of river or keeping the river at the center, but also the other elements of nature which have contributed for this region to become a good geocultural region as one sub-part of this entire river Godavari. I thank the ISOLA team for giving me this opportunity to speak on this small study that I have been associated with. And I thank Shruti and Swati ma'am also, who is instrumental in starting this ISOLA chapter. I thank my friend Ritu, who informed me and gave me this opportunity to share my views and my study on this region of Godavari. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you. So let me just take a quick recap of both the wonderful presentation before I move on to the questions. So about the first presentation, so it was an eye-opening presentation by Amruta ma'am. As rightly pointed out by her, the understanding of regional landscape is pivotal to all of us as landscape practitioners. And it is the sensitivity towards the larger ecosystem that can bring about at least little change through our projects and design decisions and create a positive environmental impact. We are in such phase in evolution of society, mankind and nature relationship that restoring back to its original is the only way forward. And professionals like us have a big role to play in this. Thank you so much, Amruta ma'am. Thank you so much. And yes, about Prajakta ma'am's presentation, it was indeed a nostalgic trip to revisit the history from landscape and geographical perspective. Superimposing cultural layer onto history and landscape geography provided an altogether new perspective of looking at our natural resources and their interaction with mankind. It was rather fascinating to relate mythological references and draw parallels to the same in physical world, something for which India is the best experimental ground. The understanding developed from this cross-referencing throws light on how changing social structures impacts relationship of man with nature and his way of expression to embrace nature over a period of time. Thank you so much, Amruta ma'am, for such an insightful presentation. Now,
Welcome.
yeah. Now I have a question for Amruta ma'am to start with the question and answer session. I'll just start with what I feel I should ask. So Amruta, mapping of entire river network gives clues about how projects should be conceptualized. If you can elaborate of what are other geographical features that should be mapped. I understood agricultural mapping is also, playing an important role. But what are other geographical features that should map before, you conceptualize design process?
I feel whatever man-made structures are like the pipelines that flow along the river. We have very poorly mapped sewage pipelines. We have very poorly mapped where the discharge is. So those kind of mapping is needed, as well as environmentally. If you say we should know what kind of birds are there, what kind of reptiles are there. We should be having tree census in place. That is how many trees are being grown in that area. What kind of girth it is having. So all that sort of mapping is very important to start any sort of project. Also, what we faced in Auric was we couldn't find a good hydrology consultant. The lacking of hydrology consultant was something who couldn't calculate how much water would flow, what kind of flood would come, and what kind of water would get into these lakes when it gets flooded. We had to face a lot of such kind of technical problems also. So I think there is a huge number of mapping ways we should be doing before we start any project. In that, majorly it is the geological part, then is the hydrological part, then is the man-made systems and the underground services that go. That we need to do.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. That's quite crisp answer to what I was wanted to know. Now my question is to Prajakta ma'am, that do the human settlements depend on other natural factors, and what are the significant relation between them?
Yes, the human settlements do depend upon the various natural resources, and water is one of the important resources because we really need it for our survival. But along with that, the provisions made by the other elements are also very important, as I have discussed in my lecture, that if we have our cities developed and we don't have them protected for our daily survival, we will be in big danger. Secondly, if we don't have the resources of food available to us, also the settlements won't survive. So the other natural elements such as the soil component, the component of forest, they also become very important for the survival and the development of a settlement. So it's not only about the geology and geomorphology. In geology, we have the hidden natural element of groundwater that supports the development of any settlement. I would like to tell you that in the Gazetteer of Nashik, it is documented by the British people in 1875 that the old Gauthan had around 2,839 dugwells in the Gauthan area. Out of which around 1,500 dugwells are still existing in the older old vadas. Those are there in Nasik. So these are resources which long and which last for hundreds of years for people to live at one location and to people to develop themselves at one location. So obviously they are important, and man has been wise enough to understand, to study these natural resources in detail. His development was always based on the observations that those he had with respect to these natural resources.
Now, Aditi ma'am, there are a lot of questions coming on. So can you just take them to the...
Yeah. Yes. Now we'll be taking questions from the audience. So I think there was a question from Pallavi Pathak, which Amrita ma'am has answered. But Pallavi, you can unmute and ask the question. And if you have any more questions, then you can do that. Pallavi Pathak, is she there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Aditi. Amrita has already answered my question. I just wanted to know what stage this is in, because I have been reading about this project some time back, and I wasn't aware whether these kinds of developments, which are also happening around the Samruddhi Mahamarg, actually, to be precise. So whether they are actually coming up, and at what stage they are in right now. So since I wanted to know a little more about the project, I wanted to know what is the what stage it is in right now.
Yeah, Pallavi ma'am, I would like to tell you that we have already started the project. The project is in construction stage, and it's almost 30-40% done, but due to COVID, it's been stopped and will start soon, as we don't have that much labor coming on site as of now. Little bits and pieces have started, but the project is in construction.
Okay, thank you.
And I am not aware of Samruddhi, so I'm sorry, I won't be able to answer that question.
No issue. Okay, I'll learn. I'll read more about it, and I'll get in touch with you later, ma'am, whenever time permits you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pallavi. Yeah. The next question we have from is Vedwati. The question is for Amrita ma'am. Whether geological features were taken into account while deciding connecting corridors of water to lake. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, the geological aspect was taken into consideration, and that is the reason where wherever the connections of the corridor were breaking and were not coming towards the lake, we have tried to establish those corridors so that that geological connection and the biodiversity is been connected through and through wherever they can go around. So what's happening with this development and the layouts that are being done, many times they cut off this kind of corridors because they need land. So here we had really good consultants, I would say, who have done the master plan, and the client was also that sensitive that they could understand that we need to create these corridors, we need to maintain those corridors. So we had to do a study, we had to present it in front of them that what sort of the biodiversity exists in that area, and that's how we convinced the client, and the corridors have been established now. Does it answer your question, Vedanti?
I think it. Yes, she said thank you. Yeah. Okay. The next question we have from is Chinmay Marathe. Chinmay Marathe, you can unmute yourself and you can ask the question.
The development that is going along the Godavari Ghats. So what is your opinion about the concretization and the deconcretization that is started? Also, that development is causing harm to the historic fabric, the physical fabric, you can say. So what is your say on that?
Yes, Chinmay, the concretization of the riverbed is certainly not good for the ecology and the environment of river as such. As I told you in my presentation, this holy stretch of river Godavari, where the Gauthan has developed, it has 5 surface streams which come and join over here, and 3 or 4 groundwater streams which are there, through which the groundwater comes into this riverbed. And this groundwater is tapped in the form of kunds. So once we have this layer of concrete coming up upon these natural rock beds over there, these groundwater resources don't find a way out over here. And in turn, the water availability also lessens. This is one factor. As I told you that Godavari is a rain-fed river. It does not have water throughout for 12 months, and certainly it has to depend upon the groundwater for the kunds to get filled. So the concretization is certainly hampering the health of the river Godavari, the environment of Godavari, and it needs to be removed, or it needs to be taken care of. And the small effort of removing that concrete from the riverbed has been done. It has started in the recent past, just before the monsoons this year.
Devayani Deshmukh, you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hello.
Hi, Prajakta ma'am.
Hi. Yes.
Devyani here. Hi. So my question is for you, in the sense that since Godavari is a rain-fed river. Did Nasik traditionally have any methods of water harvesting? Because Nasik depended only on the river as a source of water. And from
Yes, Devani, there are a lot of references of kunds and ponds being constructed right from the Peshwa period and by Ahilyabai Holkar also. And these kind of rainwater harvesting structures are not only seen in and around Nasik, but in the interiors of the city, in the region of Nasik, in the smaller settlements also. And there is a huge lot of dug wells, or you can say nice bawdis which are there in the smaller villages, which have come into light because people have started exploring them. They have started utilizing them, maintaining them for their own purpose once they have understood. So it is not only the riverbed that was there available for the purpose of water, but the wells was one of the major sources of having water as a resource for daily use.
so, did it mean that the water table was high during the earlier times, or were they spring-fed? How did it work?
Yeah, see, actually, in what happens in Deccan basalt, the passage of water or the
Yes.
speed of flow of water is quite slow, relatively as it happens in the sandstone aquifers or the sedimentary rocks. So what happens is the water keeps on flowing at least for 4 to 5 months after the rainy season has gone back. We have done a small study in the year 2017 where we studied around 25 wells in the old Gauthan area, 10 or 12 wells on each side in the month of January. So in the month of January, we found that the water could recoup in these wells within 24 hours in the smaller vadas. And these wells are hardly an opening of 4 feet by 4 feet in the entire vada. And you will observe that the water recoups in the month of January. That tells us that we still have a good groundwater table in some areas of this region.
Thank you so much, Prajakta ma'am. Thank you, Amrita ma'am, Prajakta ma'am, for a wonderful presentation. We are almost at the end of our session now. So I would request Treasurer Dhanashri Kulkarni to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, Amruta ma'am and Prajakta ma'am. It was very insightful and it gave us a larger, we looked at a larger context, not in terms of Nashik. It was a great regional that we had an overview of. I would like to thank Nandan Malani also for moderating this session for us and bringing all this together for us. Also, Ritu has been has played a pivotal role in bringing all of you together for these sessions, and it was so interesting to know about Godavari and Nashik. Here, I would also like to thank our technical support team, our donors. Mr. Manoj Shah from Stone Studio have been our donor for these sessions, and they have been a great support to us. Also, our technical team, Shrikant Morgaonkar and Aditi, who have been constantly telling people as to how to put this up right. And thank you all. Thank you, our team who have been consciously making an effort to do uh, uh, take up sessions which are allied from just landscape architecture.
So everybody, thank you so much, Dhanashri, for the vote of thanks. Yeah. So basically, I just want to give you a brief idea about the next event that we are going to be doing. So next event, we are going to be traveling further along the east, along the river Godavari, keeping our same theme in place. And we are going to go to the culturally rich town of Aurangabad. There we will be meandering through the stories of the ethnic landscapes told by World Architecture Community awardee architect Ajay Kulkarni. So please everyone, I request you to join us on 27th of September, Sunday at 11 a.m. I can like assure you that you will be absolutely glued to your seats with this session. So please definitely join us. Thank you so much, everyone.